At dinner, my dad didn't yell. He didn't insult me. He didn't even look uncomfortable. He just said it like a rule everyone already understood. Your sister's family comes first, he said, setting his fork down. You're always last. My sister smirked. Not surprised, not embarrassed, relieved. The room went quiet, and I felt every pair of eyes slide toward me, waiting for the old version of me, the one who laughed it off, who paid, who fixed things. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I looked up, met my dad's eyes, and said, "Good to know," because in that moment, something snapped. Not my heart, my loyalty. After that night, I stopped sharing money. I stopped keeping my life flexible for emergencies that weren't mine. So, when a real family crisis finally hit them, and they expected me to step in like always, what I did next left the entire table frozen. My name is Chloe, and for most of my life, my family described me with the same word, strong. They said it like a compliment. But what it really meant was convenient. My sister Emily was the center of everything. She had a husband, Mark, and 2 kids. Her life was loud, complicated, and always urgent. There was always something happening: school fees, car trouble, work stress, another plan that had gone wrong. And then there was me. I had a stable job. I paid my bills on time. I didn't ask for help. So everyone decided I didn't need anything. When Emily struggled, the family leaned in. My mom, Linda, worried out loud. My dad, Robert, stepped in with advice. Conversations bent toward her problems, like gravity pulled them there. When I mentioned something from my life, it floated for a moment, then disappeared. "How's work?" my mom would ask. "Busy, but good," I'd answer. "That's nice," she'd say quickly. "Did you hear what Emily's dealing with right now?" And just like that, I became the listener again. I noticed the pattern early, even if I didn't name it. Emily's needs were discussed openly. Mine were assumed to be non-existent. When she cried, people rushed to fix things. When I stayed quiet, they took it as proof that I was fine. Birthdays made it obvious. Emily's were planned weeks ahead: reservations, gifts, photos. Mine were casual. "We'll do something simple," my dad would say. And simple always meant small. Family trips followed the same rule. If money was tight, my suitcase stayed in the closet. "You understand," my mom would say. And I did. I always did. By the time I left for college, no one cried when I packed. There was no long goodbye. Just a hug in the driveway and my dad saying, "You'll be okay. You always are." I worked, I studied, I paid my own way. Every success I had quietly reinforced the story they told themselves, that I didn't need support because I never asked for it. Years later, when I moved to another city for work, the distance didn't change anything. Calls were short. Updates about my life were acknowledged, then redirected back to Emily, and slowly, without ever sitting me down and explaining it, my role became permanent. I was the backup, the safety net, the one who could handle it. Money slipped out of my account in small, regular amounts. Just this once. Just until next month. Just to help. No one kept track, because they never had to. And I told myself it was fine. That this was what being mature looked like. That love meant giving without keeping score. But sitting at that dinner table, hearing my dad finally say it out loud that I was always last, I realized something unsettling. I hadn't just been placed there. I had stayed there. And for the first time in my life, I started to wonder what would happen if I didn't. That dinner was supposed to be ordinary. My dad had suggested the restaurant, a place he liked, because it felt grown-up, quiet enough to talk, expensive enough to feel important. We sat in a corner booth, menus closed, waiting for our food. Emily was already talking about her kids' schedules, about how exhausted she was, about how Mark's work situation was still complicated. My mom nodded sympathetically. My dad listened, serious and focused. I waited for a pause so I could share my own news. I'd been promoted. A real step up. More responsibility, more pay. It wasn't something I talked about often, but that night, I thought it mattered. When I finally mentioned it, my mom smiled politely. "Oh, that's nice, Chloe. Nice. Then Emily sighed and said, "You're lucky. At least you don't have all this pressure." My dad leaned back, folded his napkin, and said the sentence that rearranged everything. "Emily has a family now. Her family comes first." He didn't look at her when he said it. He looked at me. "You're always last," he added calmly, like he was explaining a schedule or a budget. "You don't need as much." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to laugh, to correct him, to soften it into something less sharp. No one did. Emily's mouth curved into a small smile as she lifted her glass. Not smug, just comfortable. Like she'd heard this truth many times before, even if it had never been said so clearly. My mom shifted in her seat but said nothing. Mark stared at his plate. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. I could feel it pressing against my chest, the familiar urge rising the instinct to make things easier for everyone else. Say it's fine. Say you understand. Say nothing. Instead, I surprised myself. I nodded once and said, "Good to know." My dad frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said evenly, "I appreciate you being honest." My mom's eyebrows pulled together. "Chloe, don't be sensitive." "I'm not," I replied. And for the first time, that was true. The rest of the dinner passed in forced conversation. No one brought it up again, but everything felt off, like a crack had opened under the table and everyone was carefully pretending not to notice. When we stood to leave, my dad paid the bill, like always. No drama, no confrontation, but on the drive home, I replayed his words over and over. "You're always last." Not in anger, not in cruelty, in certainty. And that was the moment I understood something I had avoided my entire life. My place in my family had never been temporary. It had been permanent. And once something is named, once it's spoken out loud, it can't be ignored anymore. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I wasn't upset. I was clear. Clear that if I was always going to be last, then I needed to stop building my life around people who expected me to stay there. That clarity didn't make noise. But it changed everything. I didn't wake up the next morning with a plan. There was no dramatic decision, no list taped to my fridge that said cut them off or set boundaries. What I felt instead was quieter and heavier, a sense that if I kept living the same way, nothing would ever change, not for them, not for me. So I started by doing the opposite of what I'd always done. I stopped reacting. When my mom texted a few days later, "Emily's a little overwhelmed this week. Could you check in on her?" I read the message, set my phone down, and finished my coffee, not because I didn't care, but because I noticed how automatic my old response had been. "Of course, I'll handle it. I'll make it easier." An hour passed. Then two. The world didn't collapse. That realization unsettled me more than my dad's words at dinner. I'd spent years believing that if I didn't step in immediately, something terrible would happen. But nothing did. No emergency, no fallout, just silence. Over the next few weeks, I made small, practical changes, quiet ones. The kind no one notices until they matter. I opened new bank accounts in my name only. I moved my savings. I canceled shared access I'd never questioned before. It felt strange, almost sneaky, even though it was my money. I kept expecting guilt to hit me like a wave. Instead, what I felt was relief. Not excitement relief, like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. The requests didn't stop right away. They just shifted. Emily texted late one night. "Hey, our payment bounced. Can you spot us until Friday?" She added a laughing emoji, like it wasn't a big deal. I stared at the message for a long time. In the past, I would have already been opening my banking app. This time, I typed 3 words and sent them before I could overthink it. "I can't right now." No explanation. No apology. Her reply came quickly. "Oh, okay. Nothing else." My mom called the next day. "You've been kind of quiet lately," she said carefully. "Is everything okay?" Yes," I replied. And it was. There was a pause on the line, the kind that meant she was waiting for more, for reassurance, for a reason, for me to smooth over whatever discomfort my silence had created. When nothing came, she filled the space herself. You know Emily's under a lot of pressure, she added gently. I know, I said, and that was it. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't volunteer money. I didn't promise to figure anything out. Ending the call felt wrong, like I was breaking an unspoken rule, but it also felt honest. For once, I wasn't performing my role. I was just existing. Over time, I began to see how much of my life had been shaped around being available. I kept my schedule flexible, just in case. I avoided long-term plans. I hesitated before saying yes to opportunities that might take me farther away physically or emotionally. Even at work, I'd fallen into the same pattern. I took on extra responsibilities quietly, fixed problems behind the scenes, made sure everything ran smoothly without asking for credit. Being reliable had become my entire identity, and I was tired. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and reviewed my finances not to calculate what I could give, but to see what I had. For the first time, I let myself imagine a future that didn't include rescuing anyone. Travel, security, rest. The idea felt almost selfish, and then I realized how deeply that belief had been taught to me. That caring meant sacrificing, that love required inconvenience, that being last was proof of maturity. But what if it wasn't? What if being last wasn't a virtue, but a habit everyone had gotten comfortable with? I didn't confront anyone. I didn't explain myself. I didn't make announcements. I just stopped leaving space in my life for emergencies that weren't mine. And slowly, I could feel the balance shifting. Not outwardly, nothing dramatic had happened yet, but internally, something had changed. I was no longer standing in the same place, waiting to be called. I was stepping back, watching, paying attention. And I had no idea how soon my family would notice or how quickly they would test whether I meant it this time. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, right as I was closing my laptop after a long meeting. I almost didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I recognized the number and the feeling that came with it. That familiar tightening in my chest, the reflex to brace myself before the first word was spoken. "Chloe," my mom said the moment I picked up. Her voice was tight, rushed, controlled in the way people sound when things are already falling apart. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair. "About what?" There was a pause. "Too long. Can you come by this weekend?" she asked. "It's important." She didn't explain. She never did when the explanation was expensive. "I'll think about it," I said. That wasn't the answer she expected. In the past, I would have already been checking flight times, rearranging my schedule, asking what I could do. This time, I let the silence sit between us. "Okay," she said finally. "Just please." When I arrived at my parents' house 2 days later, it felt different before I even stepped inside. The driveway was crowded. Emily's car was there. Mark's too. The front door opened slowly, like the house itself was hesitating. Inside, the living room looked heavier than I remembered. Stacks of envelopes covered the coffee table. Bills, notices. Papers with official-looking logos and red stamps that made my stomach tighten. No one was sitting comfortably. My dad stood near the window, arms crossed. My mom hovered near the couch. Emily sat stiffly, staring at the floor. Mark avoided my eyes completely. No one asked how I was. My mom started talking right away, words spilling out faster than they could be organized. There were some delays, a few decisions that didn't work out the way we expected. "It's temporary." Emily jumped in. "It's not as bad as it looks. We just need time." My dad cleared his throat. Things got tight. They talked around the problem, circling it carefully, like saying it directly might make it real. I listened quietly, hands folded in my lap, noticing how familiar this felt. The tension, the build-up, the moment right before they all turned toward me. And then they did. "You're in a stable place," my dad said finally. "You don't have kids," my mom added. "You can handle this better than most," Emily said softly. There it was. The assumption dressed up as logic, the unspoken agreement they'd all already made before I walked through the door. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not panic, but clarity, sharp and calm. I asked one question. What's the plan if I don't help? The room went silent. My mom's face fell. Chloe, don't say that. I'm serious, I said evenly. What happens if I don't step in? No one answered. Emily looked panicked now, not relieved. My dad frowned like he was trying to solve a math problem that no longer made sense. Mark shifted uncomfortably near the doorway. That's not fair, my mom said quietly. We're family. I nodded. I know. And for the first time, knowing didn't automatically mean sacrificing. I need time, I said, standing up, to understand everything. They nodded too quickly, grateful, certain. They thought time meant I was calculating how much I could give. As I drove away that evening, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, I realized something unsettling. They weren't scared of losing everything. They were scared of losing me as the solution. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush back to reassure them. I let them sit with it. Because whatever happened next would prove whether I was still last, or whether I had finally stepped out of the line entirely. I didn't sleep that night. Lying in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling I'd memorized years ago, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, anger, and something steadier underneath it all. Resolve. Not the loud kind. The kind that settles in once you finally stop arguing with yourself. For the first time, I admitted the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't being asked to help. I was being expected to rescue. By morning, I knew I couldn't walk back into that house the same way I always had, empty-handed, except for reassurance, ready to absorb the damage so everyone else could breathe again. Instead, I made 2 appointments. One with a therapist, one with a lawyer. I needed clarity, not comfort. When I returned the following weekend, the house felt different. Quieter, tense. The bills were still there, but now they were stacked neatly, as if organization alone could make them less frightening. My parents were already seated at the table. Emily sat beside them, hands clenched in her lap. Mark hovered near the doorway, like he wasn't sure he belonged in the room where the future was about to be decided. No one smiled when I walked in. My mom spoke first, her voice soft in that careful way I recognized instantly. We're really glad you came. I sat down slowly and placed my bag at my feet. Let's talk. My dad launched into explanations, market shifts, bad timing, decisions made with optimism and not enough margin for error. He spoke like a man presenting a case he hoped confidence might win. Emily nodded along, adding details about stress, about the kids, about how none of this was supposed to happen. Eventually, the words ran out. That's when my mom leaned forward. We just need help getting through this part, she said. Once things stabilize. How much? I asked. The question landed hard. My dad hesitated. My mom blinked. Emily inhaled sharply, then said a number. She said it carefully, as if the way she spoke it might make it sound smaller. I nodded slowly. And after that, what's the plan? My dad frowned. What do you mean? I mean, I said evenly. What changes so this doesn't happen again? The air shifted. Chloe, my mom said, her voice tightening. This isn't the time to interrogate us. I nodded. Then, it's not the time for me to write a check. Emily sat up straighter. We're family. This isn't about plans, it's about helping. Helping who? I asked. She looked at me like the answer was obvious. Us. I glanced around the table. And who's helping me? No one spoke. My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're in a different position, he said. You're single. You're stable. You can afford to step in. There it was. The logic I'd heard my entire life. I can afford to step in, I said carefully, because I've spent years building my life as if no one would ever catch me if I fell. My mom's eyes filled with tears. We didn't know you felt like that. I met her gaze. You did. You just didn't think it mattered. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was discomfort. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it onto the table between us. The movement was deliberate. Every eye followed it. This is what I'm willing to do, I said. And this is how. My dad opened the folder, scanning the first page, then the second. His jaw tightened. My mom leaned over his shoulder. Emily's face drained of color. "This is a loan," my dad said flatly. "Yes," I replied. "With clear terms." Emily shook her head. "Why are there conditions?" "Because this isn't an emergency donation," I said. "It's structured help." My mom's voice trembled. "You don't trust us." "I trust patterns," I said quietly. "And this pattern has been in place my entire life." I explained the terms slowly. Assets sold before any money changed hands. Spending documented. No new financial commitments without proof of sustainability. Mandatory family therapy. A written agreement protecting my credit, my name, and my future. My dad pushed the folder away. "This is cold," he said. "This is how banks treat people." I nodded once. "Then treat me like a bank. Because when you needed emotional support, I was family. When you needed money, I was infrastructure." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "So you're punishing us now?" I shook my head. "I'm stopping the punishment of me." "If you don't help," she whispered, "we lose everything." I held her gaze. "If I help without boundaries, I lose everything I've built." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mom reached for my hand, then hesitated, like she wasn't sure she still had the right. "We never meant to make you feel last." I gently pulled my hand back. "But you did, and you said it out loud." No one argued with that. My dad stared at the folder, jaw tight. "So this is it," he said. "Sign or sink." "No," I corrected him calmly. "This is grow or repeat." Time stretched. Minutes passed. My parents whispered to each other in low, frantic tones. Emily wiped her cheeks. Mark paced behind her. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I waited. Finally, my dad looked up. "We need time." I stood and picked up my bag. "You have 24 hours. Emily's head snapped up. "That's it?" "That's it," I said. "Tomorrow I'll come back. Either we move forward like this or we don't move forward at all." As I reached the door, my mom called my name, her voice breaking. "If we say no, are you walking away?" I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "I'm not walking away from you," I said quietly. "I'm walking toward myself." And with that, I left them sitting there frozen, not because I'd taken something from them, but because for the first time, I hadn't given myself away. They signed the papers the next afternoon, not with relief, not with gratitude, but with the quiet resignation of people who had just realized the rules they'd lived by no longer applied. There were no speeches, no last-minute attempts to negotiate. My dad read every page again, slower this time, like he was hoping the words might change if he stared long enough. My mom sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes red but dry. She'd cried all her tears the night before. Emily watched the pen move across the page, as if it were writing something permanent into her life, because it was. When the final signature was done, the room didn't feel lighter. It felt exposed. My dad slid the folder back toward me without looking up. "We'll follow the terms," he said, his voice flat. "I know," I replied. That was the moment I felt it, not victory, not satisfaction, but release. The weight I'd carried for years wasn't transferred to someone else. It was simply set down. The changes started almost immediately. Within the first week, expenses that had once been brushed aside suddenly mattered. Subscriptions were canceled. Credit cards were cut up. Assets were listed for sale, not symbolically, not eventually, but practically. For the first time, money wasn't abstract. It had limits. Emily struggled the most. She called me once, late at night, her voice tight. "I didn't realize how much you were covering." "I know," I said. She waited for reassurance, for comfort, for me to soften it. I didn't. Family therapy began 2 weeks later. The first session was painful in a quiet way. My dad spoke like a man afraid of saying the wrong thing. My mom apologized repeatedly, but never quite finished a sentence. Emily sat stiffly, arms crossed, defensive until the therapist asked a simple question. "What happens when Chloe doesn't step in?" No one answered. That silence did more than any argument ever had. Over the next few sessions, patterns surfaced that had never been named before. How Chloe's fine had become an excuse. How my independence had been mistaken for endless capacity. How being the reliable one had slowly erased my right to need anything at all. I listened more than I spoke, not because I had forgiven everything, but because I no longer needed to be heard to feel real. Outside the sessions, life adjusted. Mark found work not because things suddenly improved, but because there was no longer a cushion beneath him. My parents downsized their expectations before they downsized anything else. And that alone changed every conversation. They stopped calling with urgency, stopped implying, stopped assuming. When my mom asked how I was, she waited for the answer. When my dad spoke to me, he chose his words carefully. And Emily looked at me differently now. Not with superiority, not with expectation, with uncertainty. For the first time, I wasn't the safety net quietly stretched beneath everyone else's lives. I was standing on my own ground. And while the family wasn't healed, not fully, not cleanly, it was honest in a way it had never been before. The cost of that honesty was high, but it was finally shared. When I went back to my own apartment, the quiet felt different. Not empty, not lonely, unburdened. For years, silence had made me anxious. Silence meant someone might need something and I wasn't responding fast enough. It meant a problem could be forming somewhere without me there to soften it. Now, the quiet felt earned. I slept through the night for the first time in months. My phone stayed face down on the nightstand, and when it buzzed, my chest didn't tighten automatically. I wasn't bracing anymore. I wasn't calculating what it would cost me to be needed. Work changed too. I stopped volunteering for extra responsibilities that weren't mine. I asked for clarity instead of absorbing chaos. When my manager thanked me for stepping up, I said, I'd like that reflected in my role. The words surprised both of us, but they stuck. I planned things without checking anyone else's calendar. Trips I'd postponed for years. Weekends that belonged only to me. Goals that didn't include an exit strategy in case someone else fell apart. When my mom called now, it was different. How are you really? She asked one evening. I told her. And she listened without redirecting the conversation, without adding Emily's stress as context. Emily texted photos of the kids. No captions about money. No quiet hints. Just pictures. Once, she added, we're figuring things out. I believed her. The biggest change wasn't theirs, though. It was mine. I stopped feeling responsible for maintaining the illusion that everything was fine. I didn't rush to smooth over discomfort or fill silence with reassurance. I let people sit with the consequences of their choices, even when it was uncomfortable to watch. I realized something that took me a long time to learn. Being kind doesn't mean being available at your own expense. Being strong doesn't mean being endlessly flexible. And being family doesn't mean being sacrificed. One evening, sitting alone with a cup of tea, I caught myself smiling not because something good had happened, but because nothing bad had. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself, and that choice didn't make me smaller. It made me free. For a long time, I believed being last was a challenge. If I tried harder, if I gave more, if I stayed quieter, I thought eventually someone would notice. I was wrong. Being last was never a position to fight for. It was a signal one I ignored for years that I was standing in a place that was slowly erasing me. What changed my life wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. The moment my dad said it out loud, "You're always last," he didn't insult me. He freed me. Because once the truth was spoken, I no longer had to pretend I misunderstood it. Setting boundaries didn't destroy my family. It revealed it. It showed me who was uncomfortable when the rules changed, who respected structure, who only felt close to me when I was useful. And it showed me something else too, something quieter, but stronger. I could love people without disappearing for them. I could help without being consumed. I could walk away from a role without walking away from myself. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've always been the one who handles it, the one who pays, fixes, absorbs, forgives, I want you to know this. You don't need permission to protect your future. You don't need to be chosen to have value, and you don't owe your life to people who only see you when they need you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say isn't loud, it's calm, it's final. It sounds like this. Good to know.